Defense, the most recently adjusted warrior trait line and a foundation for his most infamous builds. It is indeed a tribute towards mixed feelings for me and probably bigger half of GW2 community due to its band-aid fixes and scuffed symptom-based problem solving that simply leads to more problems. What's wrong with defense then? We can start the list with thick skin and hardened armor. In short, these two are only sources of protection and resolution accessible in Warrior's core toolset. To get more of either boon, you need to double into runes or spellbreaker specialization, which isn't an irredeemable flaw on itself, but shows roughly how pathetic Warrior's boon access is as a whole. Thick skin grants protection on cast of a healing skill. No one with right mind uses heal skill in front of their enemy without at least CCing them, and therefore that protection uptime would be worth more, for example, on burst hit or anywhere when I'm indeed in combat and not behind a rock healing. In short, only combat stimulant makes true use of this trait's utility, while other healing skills just slap a sticker on top of your heal and call it a day. But scuffed protection is always better than no protection. At least, first thing flying at my face once I peek from behind that rock is going to hurt less. Hardened armor, on the other hand, is irredeemably bad. Resolution by default reduces condition damage taken, so it's being applied on getting critically hit only means its duration is getting wasted before actual dreadful conditions are even applied. The same applies to your blocks. If you are blocking, you aren't receiving no conditions, and therefore your resolution does little to nothing. And if you have conditions already, and you just started blocking, why wouldn't you cleanse them first? I understand that the point of damage reductions is to grant small advantages rather than swinging entire fights around, but there is a difference between small advantage and insignificant advantage. These two traits could be much more useful if their activation requirements were changed. Currently, they resemble a parachute stand on a first floor balcony. Example of small yet meaningful advantage would be Adrenal health, restoring between 10 and 30% of your health bar over 15 seconds, depending on adrenaline spend and what game mode you dwell within. Even 10% of your health bar is enough to make a difference in a pinch, and it being a reward for landing a burst skill, as well as rewarding whatever time you managed to buy, makes it consistent, one of the better designed warrior traits. Going through major trait columns, first we encounter Shield Master, which used to reduce cooldowns of shield skills on top of its current effects of reflecting block projectiles and granting adrenaline on block. It used to be one of strongest warrior traits in PvP, since shield is warrior's only source of hard block, and shaving its cooldown from 30 seconds down to 24 was a significant boost to survivability, and it got removed, because warrior just blocking was already too much in WoD, where Mesmer has 11 seconds of complete invulnerability, during which it can freely cast all his bullshies, and it's somehow not a problem. On top of which, the amount of unblockable CC in this game has just increased last May, yet again, because what psychopath would have wanted their few defense options to be at least fucking reliable? Therefore, because of nerfs to shield and slowed creep of unblockable CCs, this trait has been relegated to single purpose of IQ checking rangers, deadies and rifle mechs. Next in line, Dodge the March, is worth as much as my opinion, which means it's garbage. Reduction in duration of movement impairing conditions isn't worth too much, since no one with right mind will wait for full duration of their crap to pass before wrangling your ass back to spawn. Maybe you could, for example, use gaps between entangle pulses this trait creates to dodge out of it, but let's be completely honest, if somebody is this kind of a dick, they are going to run Jacaranda, and all they need to do to deny you life-saving effect of this trait is using Jacaranda's Embrace. In short, only thing this trait provides that matters at all is regeneration, which is outshined by Adrenal health, has worse uptime, and can be stripped or corrupted. Dodge the Marsh is worse version of Warrior's Sprint, and basically require opponents to grief in order to make a difference. Cool the Weak, on the other hand, is perfectly usable trait. Weakness application on burst and increased damage against weakened targets are bonuses that cannot be ignored, especially in tandem with likes of Hammer and such. Stripping opponent's ability to hit critically already debilitates damage potential of any power build, and making them deal 50% of their damage on top of it makes weakening your opponent almost as effective in 1v1 scenario as using Endure Pain. Speaking of which, Defy Pain does exactly that on Elite Cast. However, Battle Standard, Rampage and Winds of Disenchantment have long cooldowns, making them unfit to utilize said trait, while Headbutt has 18 seconds of cooldown, making balancing this trait a nightmare. As it stands, it is only good for Berserker and somewhat usable for Bladesworn, otherwise a waste of time, especially considering what we just said about weakness. Resilient Roll is a nice trait tied to something everyone has access to. Most of time, we use our dodge to avoid damage or CC, and sometimes to cover ground safely. In such situations, resistance, turning off Cripple, Chill, Blindness and Weakness can come in clutch in close fights, especially if we know exactly when it will appear and therefore can utilize it to its fullest potential. Second trait in defense without a flaw so far. Merciless Hammer was moved here from Strength, where it used to reside. I don't necessarily understand why this so clearly damage-focused trait finds itself in defense. It makes you deal 20% more damage to controlled enemies with Hammer and Maces specifically. That is far from enough to make Maces playable in any mode, but we can discuss how shitty they are on different occasions. This trait, alongside likes of Axe Mastery, alters the way adrenaline is gathered. If I am to be asked, I think gaining extra adrenaline on landing SST should be baseline feature of adrenaline mechanic rather than a highly specific trait, and no weapon should be dependent on a trait to properly function. As it stands, Hammer on its own cannot generate enough adrenaline to burst twice in a 1v1 before the fight is concluded. And that's with considering 20% damage difference without said trait, which would make the fight slightly longer. Hammer, fortunately, isn't completely useless without this trait, and it will at least deal considerable damage. Maces, on the other hand, are a lost cause. The Last Stand is a crutch for the mindless. Stances seem strong on paper, but in practice they often serve you only as long as your opponent's game knowledge ends on knowing where their keyboard is. Berserker Stance and Frenzy are completely useless, as there are better ways to get their respective effects on shorter cooldowns. And both Endure Pain as well as Defiant Stance can be played around really easily. Endure Pain does literally nothing to prevent condition builds from ending your miserable bloody lifeu, and anyone with reasonable CC can make you wait out your precious skill getting acquainted with the pavement. That last also applies to Defiant Stance, on top of which healing received from Defiant Stance is directly proportionate to how severely retarded your opponent is. If your enemy just No, you just wasted 30 seconds worth of cooldown on less healing than Adrenal Health provides in the same freaking time frame. Only stance truly worth taking is Balanced Stance. It prevents you from getting critically hit over its duration, which shaves off often 2/3 of your opponent's damage, and slightly hinders combi builds, which apply X on critical hit, but most importantly, it grants stability and swiftness. On why is that so important? Later. Cleansing Ire is another concept that seems great on paper. Cleansing a condition on burst hit seems like a great idea until you consider that Blindness, Cripple, Chill and Immobilize are all conditions that prevent you from hitting your burst, either by nullifying your attack or by preventing you from reaching your target in the first place. On top of which, enemy's evasion, blocks, ages, distortion, and whatever bullshit he comes equipped with will certainly come into play. Cleansing Ire is simply not reliable in the very situation it was made for. Finally, Stalwart Strength. It is my favorite and my least favorite warrior trait simultaneously. What I mean by that is, warrior really needs stability to properly function outside of a 1v1 scenario with mutual agreement not to bring CC. Picture typical teamfight. Two teams are roughly on the opposite sides of middle objective and are tiptoeing on the edges flinging projectiles, AoE, wheelbenders and other garbage at each other. In the middle of all that chaos is a zone I'd like to call Mo Station Area. That's roughly what happens to you when you find yourself there without stability or hard block to save your mispositioned arse. Stalwart Strength grants stability on landing any hard CC. Unfortunately, that requires you to land a CC before you even get to smell your reward. If we consider existence of Guardians, Necromancers, Mesmers, and anything that has AoE, Aegis, Blindness or Stability, we can clearly understand why and how that method of preventing your demise can be rather unreliable. In Warrior v Warrior and certain other Warrior v something matchups, whoever gets stability first usually wins the encounter, or at least gets the upper hand before screwing up enough to lose from winning position. In short, this trait is an unreliable source of stability, granting increased odds of winning in already favorable scenario when warrior can CC his opponents, and contributing nothing in scenarios when warrior struggles the most. In summary, defense has some of the best warrior traits, and most of its flawed traits are at least usable in right circumstances or only held back by their correlated skills, being far from stellar. As a goulash it is certainly digestible, and can be fitted into almost every build, which contributes to its popularity. That, however, doesn't mean it is free from minor flaws, and these flaws, sometimes obscure or downright abstract, add up to create Warrior's scuffed self and cement his position as not much more than a noob stomper. Many of these traits could be easily improved by simply changing their activation requirements, or by letting them ignore block and blindness. Others would require some skills to get updated, or some more interesting changes. For example, letting Defy Pain scale its duration with cooldown of the elite skill that was used to activate it. That proposition could scare some of you, but to be completely honest, it wouldn't make Rampage any more obnoxious than it already is, and Warrior is, at least for now, far from breaking the game. With that said, Crabface out.